Hello and good evening. This is one of the constituent components of the recently posted 5 race cars that never got off the ground video, posted separately for largely research purposes to determine which car gets a deeper dive video in the future. Enjoy! Okay, let's hop back 45 years and cross the channel to look at one of my favorite Jag designs, what I would argue might be Malcolm Sayers' best design work, the XJ13. Jag in the early 60s was what might be called an organization of considerable self-worth in the motoring world, particularly in racing, and not without justification. The D-Type had won Le Mans in 1955, 1956, and 1957, until it was subsequently rendered obsolete due to regulation changes, largely aimed at the car, and thus Jag was eyeing a return to La Sarthe with some not inconsiderable interest in the new decade. They were flush with cash, at least as far as Jag's fortunes go, from the success of the E-Type after its launch in 1961, and with the relaxing of Le Mans displacement restrictions again, Jag's engineering director, William Hines, not sure, motivated the final development of a dual overhead camshaft V12 that had been bouncing around drawing boards at the firm for some time. This engine essentially consisted of 2 XK straight sixes splodged together to share a common crankshaft, just like 2 shortbread biscuits are splodged together with some jam to make a jammy Dodger. The engine was almost entirely made from aluminium, as befits a racing engine, initially equipped with 6 carburetors that were later replaced with Lucas fuel injection. And there were several minor internal modifications from the XK engine to optimize the new power plant for racing. It took until 1964 before the initial development of the 5-liter 12-cylinder was complete, this development led by a Claude Bailey, and the rest of the car was designed around it and a ZF 5-speed manual gearbox, the combination of which sent power, unsurprisingly, to the rear wheels, either 502 or 445 horsepower, depending on which source you prefer, and about 380 pound-feet of torque. It was a relatively short trip, too, for that power, as Jag designed the XJ13 with the latest innovative concepts popular in the field of the time, and thus, like its contemporaries, the Lotus 25 and the Lola Mark VI, also conveniently designed not that far away in other parts of England land, the engine was mid-mounted, the chassis was an aluminium-based monocoque, and the drivetrain was a fully stressed member of the chassis. Quite a potentially compelling setup, as we saw with the Lola T70 in its various versions. Malcolm Sayer penned a stunningly beautiful riveted aluminium roadster body. Suspension was more double wishbones this time with coil springs. Stopping power came from ventilated Gearling disc brakes, and the total weight for the car came in at just under 1,000 kilos, or 2,200 pounds, with a reported top speed of 278 kilometers an hour, or 178 miles per hour. However, by the time all the major development work had been completed and the first chassis constructed in 1966, circumstances had changed. Jag had been purchased by BMC, the British Motor Company, and focus had shifted to developing the new XJ Saloon, which, okay, fair, that's the sort of thing that actually potentially turns a profit. The competition landscape had changed as well, however. Ford had finally won at Le Mans with the 7-liter GT40 Mark II, prompting the Frenchies to change the rules again and and announce a production requirement for any cars with engines larger than 3 liters, which effectively rendered the XJ13 obsolete with its 5-liter V12 and production volume of 1. The production requirement, for those of you unaware, was of course 50 in those days, and while Ford had the economic might to kind of push that through, and I don't know, Ferrari glad-handed somebody to get an exemption made, Jag wasn't quite that well off even with BMC behind them. Further testing of the 1 XJ13 at several UK racetracks revealed that substantial further development would be required to make the car competitive on pace with the current Fords and Ferraris, never mind the production requirements, and as such, the car was relegated to a storage shed for several years. It was then briefly revived for a commercial to advertise the upcoming Series 3 E-Type, which was going to be sold with JAG's first production V12, only to experience a blowout on the host track's banking, causing the car to crash and sustain heavy damage, after which it was restored unrestored. Abbey Panels Limited, the company responsible for much of the original metalwork for JAG's competition machinery in that era, as well as the original GT40, a few Lotuses, a few MGs, and a raft of others besides, offered to rebuild the car for Jag, and it was repaired with some slight bodywork modifications, and went on to be shown for several years by the Marks Heritage Department until the healthier of its two engines was over-revved and thus destroyed. This relegated the car to use only with the second power plant, which was only marginally healthier than the first one after its over-revving. A complete restoration was undertaken in the early 2000s, with the car finally making a re-debut appearance at the 2007 Le Mans Classic and Goodwood Festival of Speed. It now lives in the British Motor Museum in Gaydon and hopefully receives regular exercise, although I don't know for certain.